Well, Patty, I loved our episode today. Of course, anytime we get Roger McNamara on here to talk about the huge B2B opportunity, it's always exciting.
It's so exciting. And he gets me excited just listening to him talk about this market.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's easy to feel like, the payments market, it seems saturated in some ways. You get out there and everybody's already accepting credit cards. Everybody's already accepting debit cards, Then you go to B2B and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. There's all these people that are not accepting payments. What's happening?
It's just wide open. I mean, like Roger was talking about, it's like a $10 trillion in B2B payments. And I believe he said,
8%.
What was it? 8% are going with cards. So do the math. I mean,
a lot of upside.
The opportunity. Yeah, exactly.
And then Patty, tell us about the insiders report.
We're talking about debit routing and a Fed proposal to clamp down a little bit on some Visa and MasterCard and issuer practices regarding debit routing.
Yes,
and then James, you had a great insight for in our questions from the field. You want to give everybody a little sample of that?
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty simple today. Just talking about how to grab the attention of somebody when you're cold calling, whether it's on the phone or in person. I was going to say, Patty, your insiders report, it's like a big shocker. Visa and MasterCard are trying to grab more of the market. What a surprise. And the Feds are stepping in. It's like, oh, the story we've seen this before. But it's exciting stuff. And then, just talking about how to grab attention. When you're out selling, it's like, no matter how good your pitch is, if you don't grab the attention of the prospect, you're never going to get a chance to give them your value prop. So,
yeah, I agree. And so we also want to mention that this episode is sponsored by NMI, and we'll talk a little bit more about that during the podcast. So, are you ready, James?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey, everybody. Patty and I are here with our good friend Roger McNamara. How are you doing today, Roger?
Hey, James, Patty, great to see you guys again.
Great to see you again, Roger. Last time I saw you was at MWAA.
It was in Chicago. We had a great old time there.
We had a great time there.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. We're going in a slightly different direction than we have in the past. Same topic, of course, we're talking about B2B, Roger being the president of Guide to Interchange, which specializes in B2B sales training and things of that nature. We're going to be talking today about how to build a B2B portfolio, meaning how to build a portfolio of merchants that largely sell to other businesses. So vendors, wholesalers, things along those lines. So Roger, can you update us since the last time you were on? What are you seeing in the marketplace? Is this concept of B2B payments, is it picking up? What are the trends that you're seeing? How are things going there?
Yeah, great. So glad to be with you guys again and to get to talk to the audience. So yeah, James, we definitely see a trend towards B2B. There are more people curious than ever about this space. I think we've talked about it in the past. It's a $10 trillion opportunity in payments.
Right.
Where card is the lowest percentage of any of the payment types in the industry. So you and I were down at SEAA. We had a great time down there. We talked, we had a full room of people at the Midwest Acquirers Association. Patty, you and I were there, and it seemed every second person, was wanting to explore B2B and find out more about it and how can they break into the category? What are the barriers? What can they do to be successful in this space? Because there's so much opportunity.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Roger, I thought one thing we could do a little different this episode is maybe start us off with some success stories. Now that you've worked with so many ISOs, I just talked to a very large, well-known processing company a few days ago. And they said, hey, you told us about that guy, Roger. We had him do one of our, kind of virtual events. And they said they've never had a topic that their agents were more interested in. So I'm hearing stories like
That's
this.
Cool.
Yeah, tell us some success stories, some examples, Roger. How are ISOs utilizing the training? How are they attacking B2B, and what kind of success are they seeing?
Sure. So, we've worked with tons of ISOs across the country in the four corners and in between everywhere else. Actually, we're going to Canada next week to work with a big player up in the Canadian market, but tremendous success across all sorts. James, we work with one-man shops who decide they want to get into B2B, want to take that first step. They go through our training, and then we love getting these success stories. I'll tell you a story about an ISO we worked with in the Massachusetts market. And not long after he took our training, he sent me an email and said, listen, I just got to let you know, I had a first transaction come through today in a B2B account that I went back and pitched after the training. And the first transaction was for $85,000, he said.
Wow.
He said, I had never seen that before. He said, I was used to $100 and $150 transactions. He said, we had to make sure that the underwriter was good and the risk was good. But, once we provided the information, he said in the transaction, he said, now I'm starting to see this $85,000 transaction come through on a monthly basis. So things like this that ISOs have never seen in the past, merchant sellers have never seen in the past. I had another independent down in the Maryland market that took our training. And not long after he took our training, he wrote back and he said verbatim, he said, wow, he said, you told us that people would tell us that their DSOs, their day sales outstanding, was 45 days. The first B2B merchant I walked into, that's what they said. He said, it was like you knew what they were going to say. And I said, hey, it's not like I know that. This is pretty standard what goes on in the market. Well, he went on to say that he was successful in signing the merchant and affiliating them for B2B, and he probably wouldn't have done it without the training. So we're seeing all sorts. James, you mentioned the group. I don't want to give out any names here, but we had a very, very large player in the market who took our training and I think was a little skeptical. And then the folks that took it embraced it, ran with it, used it, were successful with it, and now we're going back to train the rest of their sales force. So, these are the type of things that we're seeing across the board.
So tell me, Roger, because you just sort of alluded there is a lot of skepticism still. I obviously, as you just explained, you've talked to a lot of ISOs and agents over the last, year or two. What is it that's holding, what are the reasons you get for ISOs and agents not wanting to build a B2B portfolio? Why, do you get any pushback, serious pushback? And if so, what is it based on?
Sure. So the kind of things we hear sometimes are, and you and I have talked about this in the past, the independents are that, they're independent, but
right. Sure.
You'll talk to folks sometimes and they'll say, yeah, well, I sell in B2B. And I'll say, well, what do you sell? And they're selling the same process that they've sold in business to consumer, which is selling a price commodity.
Yeah.
So it's really hard sometimes for somebody who's been selling that price commodity in B2B and think that they're having relative success. They're signing up a merchant, that merchant is processing $500,000 a year. But here's the key, Patty. That's a $20 or $50 million entity, and they're getting $500,000 in credit out of it when they should be getting 5, 10, 15 million. And the reason they're not getting it is because they're selling old ways, which is to sell on price in B2B. And there's so much more to selling in B2B. We've got to look at the reduction in day sales outstanding and how do we quantify it. We've got to look at the efficiency component of what we bring in a transaction with credit. We've got to look at the tax benefit associated. And these are things that are in our training that are not really general knowledge out there in the B2B selling world. So I would tell you that, once we talk to these guys, and we've converted a lot of them over to our training, but the first thing that they think is, hey, I'm already selling in this space. What they don't realize is they're hitting singles, not grand slams.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting, Roger. I just talked to one of my consulting clients has a newer ISO, but substantial. And we were talking about this. I ended up recommending your training because we were talking about how he already, we were talking about opportunities to pursue. And one of the opportunities that came up was maybe I should be focused more on B2B. And I'm like, yes, that's a good idea. So let's talk more about that. And he's like, yeah, because he said, I go out there and he said, I've got these accounts. He said, they're so easy for me to sign up. I go out there, I sign them up. They do 100,000 a month in processing. I just set them up with a nice gateway, a pay trace or whatever. And they, and then he said, then what we do is we just match their current, what they were doing is they were matching their current effective rate and then doing the interchange optimization to generate margin or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, but do you realize that if they're processing 100,000 with you based on the pitch you just told me, you probably could get them to be processing 1 million or more a month?
Absolutely.
And he's like,
Absolutely.
wait a minute, what? I'm like, yeah, you're the lesser of all the evils in their mind right now. If you actually became the preferred payment method, their revenue is probably 15, 20 times that, what I mean?
We like to say to people, listen, credit can be a collection tool, not an overhead. Today, to your point, James, is the lesser of evil. You're an overhead. You're a line item cost on their balance sheet. We want to show those finance types that we're a collection tool and we're the most profitable collection tool because we can reduce DSO. And for every day we reduce DSO, that's money to the bottom line for these finance types.
Right. Absolutely. So I think it's really interesting. And I want to shift the conversation to really practical, kind of step by step of how this is working. But I do want to just zoom out for one more second here So the number you gave a minute ago, you said it was how big of an opportunity? You said it was 10 trillion, or was it
10 trillion? That's what I say. Al Kelly from Visa actually says, I believe I've heard him say 33 trillion. So I mean, it's the number somewhere between 10 and 33, but it's a big number.
And I want to
anything over 10 is a big deal anyway, right?
Well, anything over 1 is
so
exactly. I just want to clarify for 1 second, Roger, for our audience. Can you break that down a little bit more? In other words, when you say this opportunity, we're talking about that's the amount of transactions that businesses are paying to businesses.
Yeah.
And then do you have any other stats on kind of like what percentage of that is currently transpiring using a card?
Oh, yeah. So
give us a little more context of the kind of the bigger picture here.
So it's a $10 trillion opportunity or 33 trillion, whatever way you want to look at it.
It's a big opportunity.
Let's focus on this. Card today is only 8% of big payments in B2B. So everything that's being transacted in the B2B world today, the biggest manufacturers, the biggest sellers, the biggest buyers, all of that represents the volume of 10 trillion. Only 8% of that is going on a plastic card, on an expense card like a P card, a virtual card, something of that method. I will tell you this, the king years ago used to be check. Check is now only 36%. COVID really put a nail in that coffin because people digitized rapidly. The winner in this was ACH. ACH came out, and ACH is now about 38% of transactions in this space. The rest is made up from wire and other methods that companies do. So card.
So 8%, you're saying it's 8% of the B2B currently is going on card.
Yeah. Now here's where the rubber meets the road on this, Patty. If you think about B2C today, plastic represents probably in the 95% range of all transactions within B2C.
Right.
So in B2B, we only represent 8%. So the question is, why are we so low? Well, number one reason is there's not a lot of people sell it. Number two reason is because the suppliers believe that it is the most expensive payment method they can offer. To James' point, it's the lesser of all evils.
Right.
So what we need to teach sellers in this space is that card can be just as cost effective as check, ACH, and wire. But you have to critically look at the card product as to how you make it cost effective. Here's what I would say to you. Card is the only payment method that comes with payment benefits on both sides. The user gets a benefit and the buyer can get a benefit. In other words, check doesn't give anyone a benefit. It doesn't give the buyer a benefit and it doesn't give the supplier a benefit. Card is unique in this space. And that's why we can get card from 8% to 28% to 38%. But we got to have more people selling it and we got to have them understanding the transaction and how it works.
Yeah.
James, does that work?
Yeah, I love it. I appreciate that. So now that we've zoomed out, now let's zoom in. So let's start at the very beginning, which is how do we find a business that we're going to go prospect? You know, most people on our podcast are like, okay, I just picked up the phone, I pull up Google Maps, I buy a list, I go out on the street. So how do they start this prospecting experience to find a B2B company that they would go after? What have you seen that's been successful?
Fantastic question. And so in our training, we cover this, and this is very unique to what we do. So we're not advocates of cold calling or working lists. Why? Because in the business space, you must follow demand. Now, part of the problem that we've had in our industry is we're very siloed. So we're on this side, on the acquiring side, but there's a whole other side of our business that hasn't been tapped into yet, okay? Now, we teach that. We teach merchant sellers how to monetize their own merchant base. The more mids you have, the more chance you have of success. You just haven't asked them the right question of your own merchants. When you go to see your own merchants, you talk to them about processing. We haven't been talking to them about what they do on the payable side of their business. We teach that method in our training, and it blows open the doors for ISOs and merchant sellers to hop right into acquiring merchants because they're not having a cold call. They're warm calling, if you want to call it, because their own customers are giving them the leads that they need to be successful.
And I think just to clarify that just a bit, if I could, I think what I hear you saying is if I go to one of my merchants that I'm currently doing processing for, let's say it's a restaurant, and I say, who are you paying with your card right now? Or who is your vendor to supply your food or your ingredients or whatever it is that you're buying in bulk? That becomes a B2B lead, obviously, because this is a business who's paying that business.
Yeah. I'll give you another step on that. How about saying to your own clients, who are your worst payers? Who's paying you in 90 days? And would you take a card to settle that? I'll go broker that deal for you. I mean, you're reverse engineering transactions.
Sure. So that's going to your existing B2B
Yeah.
right, merchant clients and saying, hey, who are your worst payers? Let's get them to pay with a card so you get your money right away.
Absolutely. You can reverse engineer the transaction. The beauty of B2B is that we don't become merchant sellers. We become brokers. We can get in between the transaction on both sides of the equation, and we can bring it together. And that's very unique about this space. But one, in our world, in the merchant services world, we haven't been used to because we're very siloed. So, thankfully our training, our guys that take it understand we have 3 phases of this that we teach. And they hit the ground running on day 2, and they go out and they implement these 3 methods in phases. And that helps them get traction very quickly within B2B. So you don't have to be going out chasing down IBM on day 2 because, the sales cycle for that would be enormous. You can go out, start with modest type B2B accounts, cut your teeth, be very successful, and get a great residual income from them.
So, for example, you might go to the restaurant, find out who their suppliers are, and then go to those suppliers and
absolutely.
What
Patty,
about
it's unlimited. So there's so many rabbit holes you can go down. I tell people this all the time in training, Patty. I tell them, go to a supermarket, buy toothpicks, put them in your eyes to keep them open 365 days a year because you're never going to get a chance to sleep.
Right. Well, tell me this though, Roger. Okay. So let's say, I'm an agent. I go to, one of my restaurants, right? And I say, hey, who are you paying by credit card? Which of your suppliers are you paying by credit card? You get that list of potential merchants, potential contacts. Okay, so how do you get to the decision maker at that contact?
So typically, let's start with a good scenario here. So let's say you have a restaurant and the restaurant pays a linen supplier, and the linen supplier doesn't take card, but he's spending $1,000 or $2,000 a month with a linen supplier. Well, he knows everything about that linen supplier. He knows who owns it. He knows who he pays. He knows when he pays them. He knows how long he takes to pay them. He knows where they're located. He might know the CFO. He might know the accounts receivable manager. You, as a business owner, you'll know all these things, or someone in your business will know all these things. Well, that's the part that we teach. We teach them to basically go in, acquire this information, and then make that first call. You're going to ask, hey, who do you deal with at this business? Oh, we deal with X, Y, or Z. Now, in our training, we will also give them a default strategy that we like the top-down selling method, because we're going to give them the buzzwords necessary. When you talk to a finance type, a CFO, a VP of finance, and you pick up the phone and you tell them that you have an alternative to their payment term process that can reduce their DSO, this is what they want to hear. This is the language that they want to speak. And those are the things that'll help. So we give them that information, Patty. It could be as simple as the owner, but they could give you the name of the CFO or somebody in between. Make that call.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. I love it. I think there's so much there to dig into. And again, there's too much to dig into, which I know is why you have the training, right? But I love it. And I think one interesting thing about that approach, though, is like you said, becoming kind of the broker and being on both sides of the transaction. I mean, you really can't ask for a better pitch than to go in and say, hey, the reason I'm calling on you is your client XYZ Linen or XYZ restaurant that's spending X amount with you. It's like you have instant credibility, We
have a mutual customer, our mutual customer I'm calling you on behalf of. That's very much different than picking up the phone book and calling somebody up and saying, hey, do you take credit cards? Yeah. That's what a credit card guy does. We teach them to be more like a payment consultant, and that payment consultant uses that vernacular. James, you and I have chatted about this in the past. The vernacular in B2B is critical to success.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
We dig deep into that with them.
Yeah, I talk to so many people that try to go after the B2B space, and they're like, well, I feel like I'm using a good script, a good pitch, whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you don't say certain terms and certain words, that CFO, that VP of finance, that payable person is going to instantly realize that you have no understanding of their business at all. Yeah. It would be like the equivalent of trying to go in and sell payment processing to a fine dining restaurant without understanding tip adjust. Right? As a payments professional, you would never, maybe you tried that when you first started and you looked like an idiot. Yeah. And then you were like, oh, this is a big deal. They have to actually track their tips and which server got the tips. And there's a lot involved with that, right? Sure. And if you don't understand that and you go in to sell a restaurant, you're going to look like an idiot. And I think, in the same way, I see people trying to sell B2B and they don't know the terms. They don't understand all of this rationale and they tend to flounder a bit. So, okay, so let's move forward with the sales process here, Roger. So we got the decision maker on the phone. We're talking to them a bit. There are obviously so many directions you can go. There's so many different kind of aspects to this value proposition. Do you have any tips as far as like, are you saying, hey, let's set up another time to talk? Are you trying to set a meeting from a meeting, or are you jumping right in? And if so, what are you talking about? Give us a little idea of kind of that initial contact.
So the initial method we teach is we want to make contact to get an appointment. But, it's very key what we're saying in that first call to really get attention. We like to teach this phrase. I'm calling about an alternative to your current term process. Now, you've never heard mention of the word credit within that phrase.
Right, sure.
But it is an alternative to their term process, because right now most businesses are giving term and they're waiting until day 45 to receive payment. That costs them money. We can eliminate that for them.
And it's also the term that they're familiar with. I mean,
absolutely.
Your
call. So they might say, well, tell me a little bit about that. So our main goal here is to get them to get in front of that prospect, because there's a lot of questions we want to ask, because the goal here will be to complete a net cost analysis, which we teach in our training, so that the seller can go back with a net effective cost of credit after all the value that they deliver is extracted. Imagine this. Imagine going back into a B2B merchant and saying, hey, listen, if you do our program with us, this is what you can offer your customers. Your net effective cost is 65 basis points to accept plastic. This is revolutionary. This is blowing the doors off what they're saying. They said, hey, wait a second, how do we get to that? Well, we're going to show them how they get their money faster. We're going to show them how they're more efficient. We're going to show them the tax benefit. We're going to show them through James's CC Sales Pro rate optimization tool, the level 3 data that they can attract into the business and what the value of that is. And then we're going to show them a net effective cost. So that first phone call, we are going to whet their appetite to get to that process. And that's what our intention is. Get that first meeting, get all that information, create that net cost calculator, and then deliver it back to the finance type.
So it's a 3-step process then, right? You call.
Pretty much.
You call, you get, then the next step is to get the information. And then the third step is to present them with a proposal.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So one of the other things I was thinking about that we haven't really discussed much on the podcast is technology. So, you have the person interested, you go back in, you're making this value proposition. How big of a deal is the technology, and any thoughts on this? In other words, is it enough for most of these agents and ISOs that want to go after this market to say, well, we have a gateway that we offer, or are there a lot of kind of integrations, ERP type stuff? I mean, what do you run into when you're out there in the marketplace trying to sell B2B?
So James, Patty, it's driven by the size of the account. So when we get up into large type, over $50, $100 million, and into the enterprise space, this is the mega accounts, the $300-400 million accounts. Yes, there's massive integration here. But sometimes that integration can be simpler than one thinks, because all that software tends to be proprietary and custom written code. So inserting your processing and a dial out string to your network can usually be all that's required. When you get into smaller integrations, like with a Billtrust or a HighRadius or some of these big ERP solutions, you might find yourself boxed out. But the large part of the market represents in the small to medium-sized space, from the businesses that are 100,000 to 10 million. This is a huge opportunity. And those are as simple as going and installing your gateway, like a Paytrace, somebody who's really successful in the B2B space. So those are pretty simple out there. And if you're a reseller for Paytrace, or you're a reseller for other gateway that's out there, it can be pretty simple. There can be integrations into QuickBooks and stuff like that. And these gateways have APIs that can interface those programs into someone's existing network. So it's a bit of a storm in a teacup. I think what happens, James, is people psych themselves out here. They say, well, wait, this is going to be a huge technology strain on me. I'm not going to go down this road because I'm so used to integration in B2C. I would tell you, as you guys know, I worked for Amex for 30 years. We aren't a huge technology player, yet they do billions and billions in this arena every year, because there are simple ways to integrate transactions into solutions. So that's what I would say, James.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I agree with you that, the larger the company, I mean, what I find is it's sometimes there's a longer sales cycle for sure. But it's not that it's necessarily that much harder on you as the seller, because usually the larger companies have their own developers. As you mentioned, they've done a lot of their own coding. And so to them, it's maybe an annoyance. It's a cost to them for sure of saying, okay, well, to make this switch, we're going to help your business in all these different ways, which is going to justify you putting one of your developers on this for 2 weeks.
Yes.
But that's ultimately what it is. It's usually a 2 week to 4 week process of saying, we got to free up one of our full-time senior developers to switch from, we were integrating, or maybe we weren't even integrating with a payment processor. We were integrating with ACH gateway or whatever. Now we're going to integrate with credit card, and that's it. So it's not like it's that big of a deal. And then the smaller ones, as you said, you just give them a gateway and, here's your login credentials and here you go. And they're need a little
businesses solve problems. So, as you said, James, they're writing code for a multitude of different things.
Right.
ACH to their bank, for cash management tools, all sorts of things.
Right.
So, if there's a benefit to their business, this is why I often walk by in big offices, these legions of guys that are sitting coding. What are they doing? They're doing exercises like this. There are guys from all over the planet that do this and find it very simple. The biggest deals that I've acquired in my time, I basically handed them the spec and said, hey, integrate us into this. And in 2 weeks, as you said, it was done.
Right. That's how it usually goes. So, okay. So kind of bringing this conversation full circle. So, we've talked about kind of all the secret sauce that you talk about in terms of the value propositions and all the reasons that they should go forward. So you're kind of winding it down. You're getting to the point where you're ready to actually finalize the transaction or close the deal, as we would call it in our space. Any tips on that? Are there, is it more of a dollar and cents conversation at the end of of the efficiencies, or how do you present this? How do you close these deals with B2B that maybe a B2C rep might not, be as used to?
Yeah. So, we close the deals. I teach a very effective technique, I should say, within the training, which is using our net cost calculator as a tool to close business. Because we get in front of that CFO and we're presenting a total cost of 50, 60, 65 basis points for the net benefit cost of plastic. That's big news. I mean, her perception is this is a 3.5 to 4% cost. And now you're showing them where it's in the 50, 60, 65 basis point range. So what do we do there? Well, a lot of people, this is a tricky step for them. They become a little unhinged. When the price gets this low, they feel like they have to justify. So we teach them a very, very important technique, which is to quote what the net effective cost is, and dare I say it, shut up. And this is a very painful 8-9 seconds that occurs in the sales process, but it's very effective. And then we teach them 2 follow-up steps from that to close the business. So using what we've learned in the business, what our net effective cost is very effective. Because remember, James, Patty, we're talking to finance people. They don't care about the weather. They care about the numbers. So when we're able to show them that and be very articulate about it and understand it, it throws our success quotient way up.
Yeah. And it's interesting too. I mean, I would say in my experience of selling some of the larger accounts that I've sold, me personally, I like it better in a lot of ways because I'm not the best small talker. I can do it if I have to, but it's not my thing, and this, Roger, we've spent time together. I mean, to me, I'm very intense. So it's like, if we're going to have a conversation, let's talk about this, let's do it, and for a lot of small business owners, it's like, I had to really kind of ease off and kind of like, hey, let's talk about your business and let's just shoot the breeze for a little bit to make that rapport. But I love getting in front of the finance people and just saying like, here's the numbers, here's what we can do for you, here's the rationale, what are your thoughts? And then just like you said, shut up and let them look at this spreadsheet a little bit and let them think and write some notes down. And next thing you know, 30 seconds later, which feels like an hour, they give you a response.
Yeah, they appreciate it actually, because, on the reciprocation side, they don't get a lot of people on the daily basis that understand what their challenges are. Right now, you step into it and you understand what their challenges are, and you can address those. Listen, the finance types are happy to hear about solutions that they're not aware of. We represent a huge opportunity for them to decrease that DSO. The average business out there, finance type in a business, can tell you the value of a 1-day decrease in their day sales outstanding. That's huge to them. Now we come in and we say, listen, we can take chunks of this away by simply instituting a credit policy for plastic and accelerate your funds, make you more efficient. I'll give you this one stat. Most businesses who don't get paid within 30-day term follow up 3 times after the term period on the phone to find out where their money is.
Yeah, sure.
Each phone call costs a minimum of $25. Now you add that to the cost of collecting your invoice. you see what effect plastic can have. If your money's already in your account, you've just eliminated a whole bunch of unnecessary processes out of the process. We show that in the training for people to see.
Yeah, and you make the VP of finance look really good as well when their days of sales outstanding starts to drop like a rock. They get a big bonus, which is really what they care about.
You're selling yourself short in the small talk arena. I've been around you more than enough to know you're a hell of a small talk.
I agree.
Like I say, I can when I need to, but awesome. Well, Roger, these conversations are never long enough to get all the information, but again, that's why you have the training. Obviously, for those in our audience that have not reached out yet, they've not learned about your training and what it can offer to them as an individual or as an ISO owner or executive. Talk to them a little bit about where they would go to learn more and tell us about your business a bit.
Sure. So, James, thank you, because we've talked to hundreds of ISOs in the past, but if they do want to reach out to us, a couple of ways. Our website is www.guide, G-U-I-D-E, the number 2, interchange.com. You can find us on LinkedIn under that. You can find me on LinkedIn, Roger McNamara, or my email address is guide, G-U-I-D-E, the number 2, interchange @gmail.com. You can reach me there, or through this podcast, you can send us a message to our website. There's a ton of information out there. We write blogs about B2B. We write in the green sheet, Patty, for you guys. We do a ton of stuff. We're very visible at a lot of the shows that are out there. So love to hear from anybody, questions they have, or just general B2B conversation.
Awesome. Roger, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, you guys are great. We really appreciate it. You guys have a wonderful week.
So, Patty, of course, this podcast is officially sponsored by NMI.com, one of the leading gateway providers, but also more than that, these omni-channel solutions they have. And today, I want to talk about the API. A lot of agents and ISOs, they kind of they know what an API is in general, but they don't really understand it.
Right.
An API very simply just allows two technology solutions to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So it's a structured way for two technology solutions to talk to each other. When it comes to the payment space, this idea of a payments API, when you zoom out, it seems very simple, right? It's just, I need to send cardholder information along with an amount to a gateway and say, hey, run this amount on this card. Right. Really very simple. And there's so many ISVs, and we even talked in the interview today with Roger about integrating with technology. And so, there's always that need to integrate. And so, but it gets so much more complicated because of things like EMV compliance, things like interchange optimization, all these different things. And I think NMI, I really believe from personal experience, they've done the best job of anyone I've seen at really simplifying their API, making it easy for developers to use it. And so it gives you a chance to go after those big B2B clients that need integration, or to, even to go after software companies directly and say, hey, are you currently integrated with Stripe or Braintree or somebody else? Why not integrate directly with NMI? We can give you a little bit of a kickback or whatever the case might be. There's all these opportunities. And I think NMI having that API access is just crucial to have a simple, well-documented API that allows developers from different software companies to be able to integrate seamlessly.
Yeah, and having a simple, seamless, simple API is so important. I mean, it takes so much of the grunt work out of the the tech workers' workload. So, everybody, this is a really great opportunity for you now to go visit ccsalespro.com/NMI, Nancy Mary Iris.com.
And now, here is questions from the field with James Shepard.
Hey, everybody. So this week on Questions from the Field, I want to just talk about how to grab the attention of a prospect when you're cold calling. And I have a very specific tip. It's going to be one of my shortest questions from the field. But I just want to tell you something that, it's so easy in my mind after you sell for, 15 years. It's like, well, obviously everybody does this. But then I talk to people and I'm like, okay, they're not doing this, So what is so important is when you're trying to grab people's attention cold calling, whether this is your appointment schedulers on the phone, this is your out door to door, you have to make your sales presentation, the first, 10 seconds, you have to make it targeted to that specific business. Okay.
Mhm.
So it's very easy to get yourself into kind of a groove. You know, you've walked into 17 businesses, you're about to walk into number 18, and you can sound very robotic.
Right.
And when you sound robotic, guess what you sound like? You sound like a salesperson.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
business owners hate salespeople. So that's
course
really
they
a
do.
bad idea. Well, you want to sound like as a real person. And so when you walk into a business, what I
A real
personally,
person with real answers, right? I mean,
Yeah.
with real actionable insights for you.
right. And the key though is right off the bat, they have to understand that what you're about to say is relevant to them. Right.
Right.
When I was selling merchant services full time, I would never go out and walk into a pizza shop and just start talking about how I sell credit card processing services. I would never do that. Instead, what I would do is I would say, hi, my name is James Shepard. I specialize in working with pizza shops on reducing their cost of payment acceptance. Right.
Right.
And so, I'm making it specific to pizza shops. If I'm on the phone, I'll say, we have a special program right now, and our program, combines these different elements, these different things. And the reason I'm calling today is your name showed up on a list of potentially qualified merchants. Now, this is Tony's Pizza Shop at 123, Trent Street, right? So you have to do things like that because you have to qualify the conversation and make sure that it's relevant to them. And so no matter what you're doing in terms of your cold calling, again, face-to-face over the phone, think about how can you add some kind of, smart fields, I call it. Like when you do an email template, you have a smart field that says insert first name here, Well, you should have in your opening pitch, insert business type here, insert business name here, insert business address here. You should have some things that are going to kind of grab their attention. And they're going to make them realize, okay, this conversation that I'm about to have, this is very specific to my business and impacts me.
That's really sound advice, James. That's really good stuff. Thank you.
Thanks, buddy.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
Okay, so last week, James and our listeners, you remember I talked about some debit card stats. And I alluded to something I was going to talk about this week with regards to debit card routing. And specifically, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission want the Federal Reserve to take a tougher stance on debit routing. Fed earlier this year proposed changing the commentary around its Durbin Amendment regulation to make clear that merchants must be given a choice between two unaffiliated networks for routing debit card payments. Now, the issue here is something we've talked about in the past, which is pinless debit. And pinless debit, as the name implies, it's offered by the regional ATM networks, EFT networks, and it's basically supports online and other card not present transactions. In the online environment, they authorize the debit card using address verification or CVV. But the problem is that issuers haven't incorporated that the corresponding technology into the cards. The same occurs with regards to what do you call them? Touch and go, contactless payments.
Yeah, sure.
Right, tap and go, right? Because there has to be something programmed in the chip to support tap and go. And we've talked about that, how there's not a lot out there that support it. So according to Pulse, which is a regional EFT network, card not present transactions now account for 1 in 3 debit card payments. So clearly the use case is there.
Yeah.
But absent the functionality, these payments are getting processed through the Visa and MasterCard networks. And the Department of Justice, in a letter that it sent to the Fed commenting on the Fed's proposal, said its analysis shows that Visa and MasterCard combined process 75% of all debit card payments and 90% of all online payments. So the Fed's proposal would be to make it clear that the merchant choice dictates in its Durbin Amendment regulation applies to both in-person and card-not-present transactions. So DOJ and FTC, in their comment letters, both said they backed the change, but they said basically that it's only one step to increase competitiveness in the debit card market. They want the Fed to adopt a more encompassing plan that takes aim at routing-based, what it calls routing-based incentives. These include rebates or lower rates when an issuer succeeds in steering more transactions to the Visa and MasterCard networks. So here's what the FTC wrote, quote, as experience with CNP transactions has demonstrated, it is difficult to predict in advance the ways that issuers and networks might devise to inhibit merchant routing choice.
Yeah.
So it's worth noting at this point, I just so that everybody's clear on this, the FTC has regulatory authority over the payment card networks under the Durbin Amendment.
Right.
And the DOJ has the antitrust power, the enforcement power for antitrust laws. And it's taken aim at the issuers and the networks in the past regarding debit card routing. Back in the early days of the regulation, for example, DOJ lashed out at Visa and MasterCard for requiring the way it was set up. Remember, it was supposed to be merchant choice, and the way a lot of merchants set it up was what they were forced to set up was when a consumer goes to the point of sale, presents a debit card, they have to choose which network it goes to. DOJ said, no, that's contrary to the Durbin Amendment, and you gotta get rid of that. So, and then for its part, the Federal Trade Commission took up an investigation into whether Visa and MasterCard, along with debit card issuers, were blocking alternative networks like Pulse and Shazam and all those regional EFT networks to process debit card payments. And that investigation appears to be still in process. And I believe it strikes me that the FTC's comment letter to the Fed incorporated a lot of stuff from its investigation. It was about an 18 or 20 page comment letter, which is was really a lot to, parse. But that was, pretty much what I got from the comment letter. But I wanted to also, there was something that came up in the Fed's proposal that I'm not sure I reported on in the past, and I wanted to point this out to people. Under the Durbin Amendment, it's supposed to send to Congress every year a report on debit card pricing and practices.
Right.
And it included that report in its request for comments back in May. And here's a couple points that really struck me. Since the regulation took hold 10 years ago, debit cards issued by banks subject to the rules. Remember, only banks with over 10 billion in assets are subject to Durbin.
Right.
Interchange has remained unchanged at between 22 cents and 24 cents. I mean, think about how many times credit card interchange has changed in those 10 years.
Right.
And then the transactions routed through the regional EFT network has fallen in those 10 years from 31 cents to 25 cents.
Well, I think it's such an interesting topic for our audience to really it's one of those things our audience doesn't really think about.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's interesting. And as a interesting aside, I just finished doing basically doing a data dive into 200,000 statement fees for our statement analysis business and building some new automation stuff with our developers. And it really is shocking how low of a percentage, Shazam and, some of these other non-Visa MasterCard networks get of, it's really kind of shocking. So I think people need to understand that, this is something that's going on, and it's these things might seem overly technical, overly complex, but they really do impact our business as a whole. They're driving the regulatory conversation right now, which is hugely important to our business. So I think it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile. I mean, it's okay, it seems arcane, it seems really complicated, but that's the reason why you need to pay attention.
Right.
Because it's these complicated things that become more complicated through legislation and regulation. And, I think there's, very good chance that, if these changes aren't made, if something, like what FTC and DOJ are looking for aren't made, they might take matters into their own hands.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, we'll definitely keep us posted on this one, Patty.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.